Hi kiddos! Today's lesson is about rules for using commas in your writing, or if you're editing some writing. This is a, follow-up from when we were talking about commas last week, and we needed to have a list and do a deep dive onto how they work. Our learning target is I can use commas correctly in sentences. As I'm doing this video today, part of your assignment is to grab some scratch paper or a notebook and take notes, because that will help your brain make connections and remember all of this. You're going to see lots of example sentences where we use commas correctly, and I'm going to talk about why they work. All of this is to create a resource for you in your notes or here in the video, so you can come back to this anytime you forget. In fact, you saw me do that the other day where I had to look something up to make sure I was telling you the right thing. It's okay to come back and check just to make sure you've got something. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. Now, I'm going to cover the trickiest rules first, and then they're going to get easier after that. Number 2, in my opinion, is the trickiest comma rule, but number 1 is the second trickiest. The fancy way of saying this is to use commas to separate independent clauses when they're joined by any of these 7 coordinating conjunctions: and, but, for, or, nor, so, and yet. So, in normal people speak, when you're taking 2 complete sentences, but you want them to be connected closely, you can use a comma and one of those linking words to connect them. So check out these examples. The game was over could have been a complete sentence. We could have put a period there. The crowd refused to leave. That's also a complete sentence. But this writer didn't want to go, the game was over. The crowd refused to leave. This writer wanted to link those 2 sentences together. So they used a comma and then the word but. The game was over, but the crowd refused to leave. It flows better that way. Same thing here. 2 complete sentences. I'll read it without the linking word first so you can hear that they're complete sentences. The student explained her question. The instructor still didn't seem to understand. Perfectly fine that way, but if you want them connected a little closer, you can use a comma and a conjunction, a connecting word. The student explained her question, yet the instructor still didn't seem to understand. Last example on this page. First, I'll read it without the conjunction, without that connector word and the comma. Yesterday was her brother's birthday. She took him out to dinner. It works perfectly well as 2 sentences, but to connect them, put a comma and a coordinating conjunction, a linking word. Yesterday was her brother's birthday, so she took him out to dinner. So in conclusion, you can use a comma and one of those connecting words, those conjunctions, to take 2 complete sentences and connect them together so they flow from one into the other. Whew. Take a moment. Make sure you've got that in your notes, because the next one is kind of a doozy. It's going to take me a couple slides to explain it. Here we go. Use commas after introductory clauses, phrases, or words that come before the main clause. Common starter words for introductory clauses that should be followed by a comma include after, although, as, because, if, since, when, and while. Okay, so in normal people speak, these are things that you add to the beginning of a sentence that aren't essential to the main sentence, but they introduce it. So look over here. This first bit, while I was eating, isn't really a sentence on its own. I mean, you could argue that the I was eating part is a complete sentence, but once you add the word while I was eating, you're like, what happened while you were eating. We're missing the important part of that sentence. That's what they mean by starter words for introductory clauses. This bit doesn't work on its own. However, this part after the comma is completely fine on its own. The cat scratched at the door. That's a complete sentence. It's a main clause or a complete sentence. They're the same thing. So, we're introducing when the cat scratched the door by putting this at the beginning. While I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. Same thing down here. This part works on its own. She was late for class. But this part introduces that idea and gives us some more information. Because her alarm clock was broken, she was late for class. Same thing here. You ought to see a doctor. That works fine. But this bit, if you are ill, introduces that. If you are ill, comma, you ought to see a doctor. Last bit, when the snow stops falling, we'll shovel the driveway. This tells when you're going to shovel the driveway, so this is introducing the idea in that sentence. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. However, if we flipped this around, you would not use a comma. So I'm going to focus on this one. While I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. We're going to keep all those same words, but that while I was eating part, you could move it to the end. It would still sound all right. So here's the one with the clause at the introduction clause at the beginning and the comma. While I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. If you flip it, the cat scratched at the door while I was eating. Same sentence, still sounds great, but when you flip that introduction bit to the end, the part that tells when the cat scratched at the door, you can have the same words, but there's no comma when it's at the end. It's just one of those rules you have to memorize. So here's a bad example. Incorrect. The cat scratched at the door while I was eating. You can hear that the pause from the comma actually makes it sound a little weird. And so even if you can't explain why this one's weird, you probably would have noticed when you were reading something out loud. Okay. Other phrases that introduce the main sentence, the main clause, might tell when or how something is happening, or give other information that helps you understand, but it's not like essential required information to understand the sentence. That was true on these. This tells when the cat scratched the door. This tells why she was late for class. This tells when you should see the doctor. And this tells when we'll shovel the driveway. So check these ones out. They do the same thing. The main clause, the actual sentence that the starting sentence was he left the room. But we can add this introduction clause with the comma to tell when he left the room. Having finished the test, he left the room. Here's another one. You'd better come early. Well, why? Let's add an introduction clause to know why we'd better come early. To get a seat, you'd better come early. I went jogging. All right, when? Well, after the test, but before lunch, I went jogging. That gives us way more information, but this is just introducing that. Remember, if you flipped this sentence, or any of these others, I went jogging after the test but before lunch, when you flip it, there would be no comma. You can keep the same words, but if you're putting them in front of the main sentence, there's a comma because they're introducing. If you put them after it, no comma. Whew, almost done with rule number 2. Remember, this is the big one. After this, they're going to get a little simpler. Finally, you also put a comma after common introduction words such as yes, however, and well. This you can actually really hear when people are talking. Well, perhaps he meant no harm. Do you hear that pause after the introduction word? That's what the comma's for. Yes, the package should arrive tomorrow morning. Comma after yes. However, you may not be satisfied with the results. Got to put that comma because there's that pause for this introduction word. Whew, we did it. Look over your notes, click back a little bit, and listen to some other parts if you got stuck. All right, this is getting a little long, so I am going to pause the video right here and cut it, and then I will see you in part 2 a little bit later. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.